It is estimated that during the many centuries of the transatlantic slave trade, more than 10 million people were enslaved and transported from Africa to the Americas. Of these, several hundred thousand were sent to the 13 British colonies and, later, the United States. Forced labor, sterilizations, lynchings, the R word and M word only scratches the surface of the mass genocide of the African people. Coastal communities across the U.S. were permanently shaped by the trafficking of African people. New England, Boston, New York City, the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia, Richmond, the Carolinas, Charleston, Savannah, the Deep South, and New Orleans had local economies built around the enslavement of black people. Once slavery ended, newly freed people needed jobs. A majority of freedmen and women became indentured servants to plantation owners and became servants of their former owners. Men mainly worked as farmers, while the women worked in houses as maids and cooks. Children also entered into servitude between their parents and their future employer. Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. Named after a black minstrel show character, the laws, which existed for about 100 years, from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. Despite all the challenges, African Americans managed to create a self-sufficient, prosperous business district in the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, aka Black Wall Street, by the early 1900s. Not long after, the neighborhood was targeted by a white mob in the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, in which more than 1,400 homes and businesses were burned and nearly 10,000 people were left homeless. The area eventually recovered but declined following desegregation in the late 1950s. In 1968, President Richard Nixon began America's war on drugs, which eventually snowballed into mass incarceration for many black and brown Americans. It has become a norm for black children to grow up in single-parent homes, their fathers away in prison for long spells and barely knowing them. Present day, the socio-economic gap between black and white Americans is one of the most persistent features of U.S. society. For example, black Americans today own over 80% less wealth than white Americans on average. Black Americans are also 40% less likely to hold a college degree than white Americans, and their median incomes are 50% lower. Although racial disparities have narrowed considerably over the past 2 centuries, the progress has been slow. Next time you see a government official, tell them you want your reparations in ones, keep it ignorant, just like they did. This call for reparations is not just a demand for financial compensation, but a cry for acknowledgement of historical injustices and systemic racism that have shaped the lives of black Americans for generations.